Hey there, welcome to the Business of Story. I'm Park Howell, author of Brand Bewitchery, which, if you follow its storytelling spells for branding, business, and sales, will help you excel through the stories you tell. Summons your copy now on Amazon or Apple Books. I'm so glad you're here today because you will learn how to use a proven story structure to make your PowerPoints, powerful. But first, your story marketing moment. It's been a few episodes since I've done a story marketing moment, and I thought today's advice is especially solid given our subject matter. Because you know what? I see so many great ideas die through a PowerPoint that is riddled with bullet points. That's why I encourage you to take your audience on a journey from their world at the beginning of your presentation, arcing them into your world when you are finished, helping them see the world through your eyes by you first appreciating it through their eyes, their point of view. I have found a great way to understand and empathize with your audience before you craft your presentation, and it is to ask these 3 questions. When I am finished with my presentation, what do I want my audience to think, feel, and do? Since in business and B2B sales, everyone in the room is operating from their logical, reasoned mind, I begin with, what do I want them to think? Do I want them to think, hey, this is pretty smart? Or do I want them to think, I never realized the potential of this idea? Or this is something we need to be doing right now? But that's just to get into their psyche through that logic brain, because their decision to move forward with you is really about how you make them feel. Do you want them to be excited, passionate, feel some FOMO if they don't move forward, or be pumped about what's in it for them, which is the opposite of FOMO? I call it for me. What's in it for me? It all comes down to this basic principle that you and I buy with our hearts and we justify our purchases with our heads. So, what do you want them to feel? What do you want them to think? What do you want them to feel? And what do you want them to do immediately when you are done to get them to buy into your story? That's the very next step. It could be anything from you want them to push your idea up the ladder to their manager. Maybe it's sign a petition. Maybe it's invest in your initiative or your startup. Maybe it's sharing your idea with others or even volunteering, jumping right into the heart of your story. But what is your CTA, your call to action? What do you want them to physically and specifically do when you are done? So let's take a listen to these principles in action. What did JFK in his moon launch speech to Congress want his audience to think, feel, and do? And in listening to it, and if you go back and watch the entire speech, what does it make you think, feel, and do?
I therefore ask the Congress, above and beyond the increases I have earlier requested for space activities, to provide the funds which are needed to meet the following national goals. First, I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind or more important for the long-range exploration of space, and none will be so difficult or expensive to accomplish. We propose to accelerate the development of the appropriate lunar spacecraft. We propose to develop alternate liquid and solid fuel boosters, much larger than any now being developed, until certain which is superior.
What did JFK want people to think? Well, in the early 1960s, in the heart of the Cold War, it made Americans believe that our position as the world superpower rested on our ability to place a man on the moon and return him safely home in this decade, not because it is easy, but because it is hard. So how did JFK make Americans feel? Well, they felt awe, wonder, and excitement about exploring a new frontier. And what did JFK want them to do? Well, of course, he wanted Congress to support the program with tax dollars, and he wanted Americans to get behind it with every bit of their being.
expirations which are particularly important for one purpose which this nation will never overlook: the survival of the man who first makes this daring flight. But in a very real sense, it will not be one man going to the moon. If we make this judgment affirmatively, it will be an entire nation. For all of us must work to put him there.
Now, you don't have to have the presence and oratory skills of JFK or be among America's most gifted speechwriters to accomplish the same feat with your audiences. You simply have to truly understand what they want that you can help them get by considering what you want them to think, feel, and do when you are done to get them to buy into your vision, your initiative, where you want to take them. The Story Cycle System is a proven 10-step framework to help you make your messaging magical, transporting your audiences and customers from their world into yours. You can learn how to apply its storytelling principles in my new book, Brand Bewitchery, that will help you craft and tell compelling presentations that sell. So grab your copy now on Amazon, Apple Books, and if you follow its guidance, I promise you'll never give another boring presentation again. And that's important, because when was the last time any of us were bored into buying anything? I learned several new principles to delivering amazing presentations from our guests today, including this wonderful nugget.
What story are you there to tell, depending on the person that you're talking to? What do they need to hear in order to move forward? And the other thing that's equally as important is, and what story are you telling about yourself?
Ginger Zumaeta is a 3-time Emmy Award-winning writer and producer who has turned her TV storytelling skills into a consultancy that helps companies on positioning and communicating their big ideas. She's the founder and CEO of Zumaeta Group and author of the forthcoming book, Deconomics: Design Presentations That Spread Ideas, Drive Decisions, and Close Deals. After going from an award-winning career at NBC to launching a strategic consulting firm, Ginger uses her experience in storytelling and persuasion to train corporate teams in telling better business stories to move high-stakes work forward with clear and succinct presentations grounded in story structure and backed by brain science. Today, you'll learn, among other things, Ginger's 5 laws for delivering high-impact presentations and how story makes it all work. So please welcome to the business of story, Ginger Zumaeta. Ginger, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Park. I'm happy to be here.
Oh, man, it's so great to have you here. You are doing a lot of interesting storytelling work in the PowerPoint presentation world, and it is so needed. I often say it's not the PowerPoints that kill ideas. It's PowerPoints riddled with bullets that kill ideas. And you, through your background in TV producing, Emmy Award-winning writer, and now in your work in brand marketing management, message management, you are doing some really interesting things with the hero's journey and presentation. So I'm so excited to cover that with you today and how we can help our listeners do a way better job of owning a room through some of your ideas. So really appreciate you being here.
Thanks so much. I'm really excited to do this. This should be fun.
So how do you find yourself in this position, helping folks out there? You've had quite an illustrious career in TV, and I imagine you got some of your story chops from there, but can you give us a little bit of your backstory?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny how things, we're all on a journey, and it's kind of funny how we go for full circle sometimes. So, as you said, I spent the first half of my career in television. I was the vice president of advertising and promotion at NBC, and we had to learn how to get our point across very quickly in 30 seconds to be exact. So, kind of getting a full story in a short amount of time was something that I learned in my TV days. And when I left television after the Great Recession, I started a consulting practice and started working with clients that, across the board, from Coca-Cola, Verizon, Amgen, on practically every industry, helping them with positioning, and messaging. And how do you deliver your product when you're a consultant? You usually deliver them in slide decks, right? So you get hired and paid on the quality of your slide decks. And so one of the things I just started to notice is that the way you structure them and the way you sequence your message just makes all the difference in terms of what kind of impact you can have. And of course, that impact is how in business people make decisions and decide, what to do next and whether to fund a project or not. And so one of my clients at one point said, Ginger, we've been noticing these decks you give us are amazing, and I'm having such a hard time with all of my team because they're giving me very complex information, and it is just it's hard to get through, and it's costing me a ton of time. Sometimes we're taking our projects up to our funding board and they can't understand what we're trying to say, and so they're sending us back to go to the well again and try to craft this story. And asked me, can you teach how you do what you do? And it made me think about let me think about that. I'm not sure I know how I do what I do. I've been doing it so intuitively for so long, but it really got me to kind of sit down and look at what is my process? How do I do these things? What are the patterns that I see in my own sort of business stories, which is what I think a deck really is. And that helped me kind of develop an approach that I started teaching to business executives and large corporations.
So before you had that, realization, what was it about your decks that were standing out to your customers? What do you think when you look back on that? Were they saying, wow, this is really powerful. I want that for my people?
I think part of it is that I wasn't afraid to make the decks really simple, honestly. Most folks want to show off. They need proof of work, or they think they feel like they need to put the proof of work in the deck. And so they put everything in there. And what that ends up doing is it turns your audience into analysts instead of decision makers. And that provides a lot of cognitive dissonance, as we say. And when folks can't figure out what the narrative is, they simply can't decide. And so sort of my special sauce was storyboarding. That comes from my entertainment background. So I would usually storyboard my deck outside of PowerPoint or whatever slideware I happen to be using. And then once I had the story really clear, I would put that into the deck and then just try to make everything as clean and simple as possible so that there was no places to get tripped up, no speed bumps.
Clean, simple, and possible, but there must have been also a structure to it. So you've got these simple, clean slides, but you must have been taking your audiences on a bit of a narrative arc from their world into your world in this process.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am, as I know you are, I've been hugely influenced by the hero's journey and all of Joseph Campbell's work. And I actually, back in my college days, I actually studied the great books. And so we were constantly looking at all of the great stories and great narratives through time. And so what I started realizing is that we have to do exactly that. You're really taking your audience on a journey. And there's something really unique about the way you take someone on a journey when you're trying to get them to make a decision. I know that you are very well versed in the hero's journey, but there's something that happens in the first sort of third of the hero's journey, which I call the persuasion journey, which is it's you have to get your decision maker across the threshold. And so there's actually a little mini journey inside the hero's journey where you have to help them see the entire thing. So you've got to actually, frame up what's the problem that you're trying to accomplish? What does success look like? What are the perils that you're going to encounter on the way? How are you going to be able to overcome those perils? You're basically taking your audience on sort of a guided simulation that helps them cross the threshold and get into action. And so there's a little journey that you really need to take people on, because at the end of the day, and we know this as storytellers, folks have to see the entire story and themselves in it to be able to feel what they need to feel to make a decision. At the end of the day, folks make decisions because they finally feel that decision. And that's really important. So you've got to get them to feel something. Of course, you've got to back up, all of your facts and logic, and that helps them justify it. But as I always say, emotion sells, logic justifies.
Yeah, having them feel something. I always coach folks when you're putting a presentation together, before you do any storyboarding, think, what is the strategy here? What is the outcome? And answer to 3 questions. When I am all said and done, what do I want my audience to think, feel, and do? And so it sounds like that's a part of your program here. We are going to, a little bit later in the show, talk about your 5 laws of high impact presentations. But first, could you take us a little bit more into this other concept of the persuasion journey? And I asked that because you were mentioning that it is like the first third of the hero's journey. And you probably have experienced, like I have, when you start talking hero's journey and that sort of thing in the business world, they just kind of go, what? Huh? Don't make me think through all that, or it sounds a little bit woo-woo. How can I immediately apply that and have the impact I want in my presentation? So I imagine you come across that. And how do you explain that to kind of the reluctant learner of that executive that just simply wants the action to take place?
Yeah, absolutely. So part of it is sort of not going there, and there's really not a lot of benefit unless someone is really, really curious about going into all of the hero's journey stuff. Neither is there really any benefit to going into the persuasion journey. But when I coach executives to tell business stories, what we do is we still look at sort of a 12-step persuasion journey, which takes the person through, okay, what is the prize that they are trying to get? And I use 12 Ps. So I start with, first of all, who's the person that we're trying to persuade? Who has to make the decision? And what's their key question? What quest are they on? Then we think, what are they really going for? What's the prize that they want? Then you've got to think of like, okay, well, why don't they have it already? What are the problems that stand in the way? What are the reasons that they haven't quite gotten, to that prize yet? And then a really interesting one, Park, is the next thing I ask them to consider, because this comes up in presentations all the time. Now, what are the perils? And when I say perils, I really mean, what's that inner dialogue that they're having that is bringing up red flags, resistance, and rebuttals. And we may not put that in the actual deck, but you have to consider those and really catalog them so that when they come up in a presentation, you're ready to address them and kind of smash them down later in the presentation. Then, my next step is the prophet. That's you, the presenter. The messenger is just as important as the message in the context of a presentation, because you need authority, credibility, and there's got to be a reason that you're the one that's actually giving that presentation. And then the messenger has to give a promise. I'm really big on, if you're going to make a presentation, you better have a point of view. And so you're basically making a promise. If we do this, we can expect this to happen. And this is what I recommend. So you've got to be really clear and have a point of view. If you present without a point of view, there's really no point. That's more of a report, and you probably could have sent it via email. Once you go through that, you need to lay out the path. What are the things that are going to get, once you make that promise and you get someone to cross the threshold, you lay out, this is the path that you're going to take to get to that prize that we talked about. You got to put proofs. So this is where you're going to put your anecdotes, your research, your case studies, your social proof. Now I'm going to give you reasons to believe that this path is the one that you want to follow. The next thing I kind of call perceived value, right? In any journey or whenever you're making any decision, there's not just the thing that you get at the end of the journey, but you also get all the side benefits of the thing. And so you really want to lay those out. We call it a value stack. And you want to lay out all those extra things that you're going to get as a result of making making that decision and going through a successful journey. Then, of course, at the end, you have to have a price. It's not always money. Sometimes it's time. Sometimes it's, social equity, whatever it happens to be. And then you've got to, have the provocation. So that's your call to action. You need to be really clear about what you need your audience to do next, whether that's, release the funding, give the go ahead to move to the next stage of the project, whatever that happens to be. And then finally, and I think a lot of folks leave this out too, is, I finished the persuasion journey with the protections. So what are the things that you can do to de-risk the decision, kind of, all of your risk reversals, guarantees, hedges that you need to make, so that you can make that decider feel comfortable about moving forward. And all of that really happens. They need to project and kind of feel and see that entire story in order to get to yes, in order to have the right information to be able to move forward in their decision.
Wow, that is a great path. I was writing them down as you went, and I'm missing a piece somewhere. So let's go back through them, just because I think this is so cool. You were able to make all of these great words out of P's. Number one is the person, your audience. Number two is the prize. What's at stake here, basically, for them?
Absolutely.
Number three is perils.
Number three is the problem.
Oh, okay. That's where I missed the problem. Okay.
That's the explicit problem, right? Like that's the real thing out in the world that is the reason you haven't gotten there yet. And the perils is a lot of that inner conflict. It might be, I don't want to stick my neck out because then what if I fail? It's all that inner dialogue that you have.
So you've got person, prize, problem, which is exterior focused. And then number four, perils, is that interior inner demon that are saying, no, we couldn't possibly. 5 is profit, 6 promise, 7 path, 8 proofs, 9 perceived, perceived value, 10 price, 11 provocation, which I like, is your CTA, and then number 12, the protections. Because whenever you're asking anybody to buy into anything, they are going to probably bring up an anti-story of how we can't possibly do that. So I would imagine that protections is coming back around and anticipating what some of those anti-stories might be so that you can have a better story to demonstrate that, no, this is actually the path we need to take.
That's exactly right. That's, in the direct marketing terms that, try it free for 30 days or, it's all of those hedges that you can get to get that person to cross the threshold. Yeah,
that is fantastic. Now you've got a new book coming out, and I imagine you're going to be covering all of this in your new book.
Absolutely. I'm so excited about that because once I started teaching this and training corporate execs and also even working with some early stage startups to get, seed funding and VC funding, I was like, this is something that isn't, I've even taught, I taught undergraduate and graduate at UCLA out here in California and Cal Lutheran and, nobody is teaching folks how to really build internal business stories. I'm not talking about the brand stuff, right? I mean, there's so much information on that, but, just workaday folks in companies have to be able to tell business stories. And it's, the more I talk to people, the more it's needed. There's a lot, and I'm sure you've experienced this in most people's career, especially if you're working, in some sort of corporation, there's a point at which you get invited to the grown-ups table. And usually that invitation is in the form of you presenting something, to, the next highest level at your company. And I've heard from so many people that, those presentations, those opportunities to have the floor, when people of power are kind of listening to you, they're real make or break opportunities in people's careers. And so I think there's just a tremendous opportunity for people to understand that both the substance and the sequence of your presentation or your business story, as I would call it, can have a huge impact in how you, the person, are perceived in terms of being in command of whatever domain expertise that you're supposed to have.
Mm-hmm. And the name of your new book is?
So we'll see if it flies. Working title right now is Deconomics: Develop Presentations that Spread Ideas, Drive Decisions, and Close Deals.
Deconomics it is. You've got my approval on this end for what it's worth.
Excellent.
So, Ginger, before we get into the 5 laws that you have found, can we jump back a little bit into your story and dive a little bit deeper in how you found yourself here? So, at the age of 32, you were working at NBC and you had quite a nice career going, won 3 Emmy Awards and so forth. But then you had a health challenge. I mean, a significant health challenge. Would you mind talking about that and how it's impacted you as a person and as a professional and what you teach today?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I early in my career, I was working in San Antonio, my hometown. And I had been working for an NBC affiliate there. And then I got approached by the mothership of NBC and their stations division to come and work for them. And the first place that I went was Philadelphia, which I absolutely loved, the people and the team there. And just 3 months into my new job in Philadelphia, I had a massive brain aneurysm at work. And so
wow.
I don't personally have a lot of recall of the actual event, but it happened luckily at work. I had my keys in my hand. I was on my way out to go grab some lunch, and I stopped to talk to one of my managers, and in the middle of talking to him, I guess, had a seizure and passed out, and they realized later that it was this brain aneurysm. Luckily, literally blocks away, there was a hospital, and so they got to me very quickly, and then jetted me to a different specialty hospital, and I was having brain surgery within a couple of hours. In fact, and most people don't know this, that they were so urgent to get into my head that the anesthesia had not quite kicked in when they started drilling. So I had some consciousness of that, and that was pretty scary.
Can you? Is it too hard to share what that was like? Because I think that is probably one of the greatest fears of everybody, going under the knife or a drill and being awake for some of it.
Yeah, it was pretty freaky. I remember I could hear everybody all around me. I could hear what was going on. They had shaved my head, and I was, pretty conscious of that. Now, granted, all at the same time, my brain cavity is filling with blood. So there's a lot going on. But I remember when I started being conscious that they were drilling into my head, I was trying everything I could to move some piece of my body. For whatever reason, I was concentrating on like a pinky finger. Maybe I thought that was going to, require the least level of effort. And I just wanted to move in order to let them know, hey, I'm still awake. I felt the pressure, honestly, Park. I don't think I felt the pain. They say that we don't have the capacity to remember pain the way that we remember pleasure. I mostly remembered the panic. And luckily, I think within, maybe a minute of that, the rest of the anesthetic or the part that kind of puts you asleep, I guess I should say, kicked in, and I didn't know what had happened after that until I woke up.
Oh
so
my
it
God. So they had no idea you were going through this till, I guess, afterwards when you mentioned it.
They did not. In fact, this is the kind of funny part. So a piece of my cranium, my skull cap, had to live outside of me for 4 months because waiting for the swelling to go down. And I remember when I was going back into surgery so that they could put it back in because it had survived. okay, this is a total crack up. I really had asked them, I'm like, is there any way I would love to have a piece of my mind to be able to show people? But they actually said, well, it's in a solution, and we actually hope it's still living in time for us to put it back in. Otherwise, you're going to get a little plastic cap. And so anyway, they ended up putting back in, so I don't get to show anybody a piece of my mind. But I had words with the anesthesiologist that time, and I was like, I don't care what you have to do, but I want to be 100% out before you guys start, carving me up. And it went very smooth.
Wow. But you were, really at death's door for about a month, it sounds like, and they weren't sure you were going to make it through or not. Is that right?
It was. For whatever reasons, they just couldn't. They just couldn't stabilize me. I came in and out of consciousness. There were points where I think my answer to what is 2 + 2 was Ronald Reagan, it was pretty screwy for a little while. But then towards the end, I think the thing that changed things is they were kind of at their wits' end. They just weren't sure what to do. And so I got a pretty massive transfusion. And for whatever reason, that kind of gave me the kick start to kind of get back into the game. And then it was actually within a couple of days that I sat up for the first time and stood for the first time, and then, started walking and started my recovery.
Wow. Now, you in some notes you sent over to me say you don't often share that story. So I want to thank you for being candid and sharing it with us today. But you say there's a reason for that. How come you don't typically share that?
It's interesting. When I think about, who I am and my identity and what I stand for, that's really just not the part of my story that I feel like I need to carry around, that the way I want to be distinguished. It's, I know there's a lot of folks that when they go through a traumatic event, it somewhat defines them, and sometimes negatively and sometimes positively. But, for me, it was like, I'm back. I've got things to do. Like, I'm moving forward. I survived, and now I just kind of want to get on with my life, and so I think that's really, I tend to be a looking forward type of person, not a looking back type of person. So I have so many more interesting things to talk about besides that. So I just tend not to bring it up a whole lot.
When you got back on your feet and you got moving forward again, how long did it take you to recover your faculties and get back to feeling like your old self again?
It sort of depended on the day, but it probably took about another, 4 to 6 months for me to be at full speed. It started out really slow. I remember, my parents had to move up to up to Philadelphia and move in with me for a while because I needed a lot of help. And they would, like all good parents, were trying to help me in every way. And I remember, sometimes I'd be looking at something and I'm like, I know what it is. I just don't have the words for it anymore. I'd want my mom to pass the salt or something. And I'd be like, can you pass and I just couldn't produce the word. And she'd always fill it in. Like, oh, here, let me give you the salt. And I started telling her, I'm like, don't help me. Like, I know my brain can get this, but it needs to find the path. Like, it needs to find the pathway. And so, I started doing little children's find a word, those little, not crosswords, but
the word search. Yeah.
Yeah. The word search. And I did a lot. I just did whatever. I looked at it like working out. I did whatever I could to kind of get my brain started again. I had faith that I would rebuild all of those connections, and I think I got most of them. There's sort of a little a fuzzy area in my memory for some of my long-term memory, but once I started just jumping back in and getting back to work and working on some of these little things and really, I don't think I ever believed, they thought that I could have been very, very compromised intellectually, and I just didn't believe it. So
Yeah.
luckily nobody sent me the memo, because I just got right back to work.
Well, good for you, and thank you again for sharing that experience. So that is such a major turning point in anybody's life. And then I know you went on and you said you got let go during the Great Recession, and your identity was at first a little bit connected with NBC, but now you're out on your own. How do these major challenges? How do you think they have informed who you are today? And how you are working with these executives to help them really own a room, because it must have had some sort of impact on how you see people, how you see your world, and how you help them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's funny. I mean, maybe it's all the reading that I've done, over the years, and I'm still a voracious reader, and I think I've got one chapter left in your book, by the way, which is very good. So thank you for putting that out into the world.
Well, thank you.
It, you know, I I am just a huge believer in our ability to craft our own stories, and needing to know the story. I used to, when I was younger, I just thought I had to be the smartest, right? And so I spent so much time studying, and honestly, I still do out of curiosity, but I felt like I needed to kind of show off my smarts in order to move ahead. And I think as you get older, you start to realize that that's not really what it's about. It's sort of about what impact can you have. It's always about the other person. It's sort of like, it's not about you, stupid. It's like, so when I thought about moving forward, and kind of defining my second act, and working with other companies to help people make presentations, one of the things that I always want to ground them in, there's sort of two things. I think there's one, what story do you need, what story are you there to tell, depending on the person that you're talking to? What do they need to hear in order to move forward? And the other thing that's equally as important is, and what story are you telling about yourself? Right. And so I think one of the ways that health episode affected me is that I just sort of decided, like, I'm done with that. I'm moving forward. I'm part of a bigger story. And the thing that I want others to know is that when you walk into a room to make a business presentation, or really for anything, you need to figure out, what is my story about myself walking in here with this message? Because if you have doubts, if you think it's too complex, if you think that the other person isn't going to get it or whatever, like, that stuff is just so detectable. So your job is truly to get your story straight, to have it down so well that you believe it with every pore of your body. And so that when you go in and give a presentation, you've got a confidence that is instantly perceptible. I tell everyone that I train, confidence is perceived as competence. It's really that simple. When you got command of your story, you know what you're there to tell, you know why it's a great decision, you've got all of the support that you need, you've anticipated all of those problems that may come up. You've got a level of confidence that is what people need to see to make decisions. At the result of every presentation, really, or every business conversation, is to give people confidence, and it really starts with the presenter themselves.
All right, so let's jump into your 5 laws of high impact sales. Can you take us through those? What's
Yeah,
law
absolutely.
number 1?
Law number 1 is, and I like letters, Park. So this one is going to be S's. Okay, 5 S's.
5
So
S's.
number 1, your presentation has to be structured as a story. It needs a narrative. It needs an arc. that's where the whole persuasion journey comes in. So it's got to be sequenced in the right way, and it has to have the right ingredients. So it has to be structured as a story.
And that's where
Number
the hero's
two.
journey comes in. This is where when you're first just structuring this is where you use your 12 Ps. Is that right?
That's exactly right. That's exactly
Okay.
right. And that's the bulk of the work, by the way. That's where you really, have to apply yourself and get your whole story straight.
I was going to say,
what-
because I imagine, I'm sorry, I got to touch on that a little bit, because I think it's really brilliant how you rolled out the 12 Ps, but I got to believe you get pushback from clients too. Like, really, Ginger, you're going to make me think through all of this? Because you know how immediate gratification is what it seems like most executives are looking for, and like, don't make me work for it. But that is the work you got to put in up front.
It absolutely is the work. And you're right, Park. Like, sometimes people feel like, oh my God, that sounds like a lot. But I guarantee you, the folks that I've worked with, they're doing so much more, so much extra stuff, that is getting in the way of them putting this story together. Whereas if they started out with that sequence, it would sort of provide guardrails to what they need to go and gather and what they don't need to gather. Most folks spend way too much time trying to process all sorts of information, put the whole kitchen sink into the presentation. And what happens is that you got all these off ramps and rabbit holes and, kind of speed bumps that end up getting in the way. So it might seem intuitively like, wow, I'm really have to think through that. And yes, you do need to do some thinking, but it's going to save time in the end, I guarantee.
And it's going to pay off in the end. So,
you're going to get your the first time instead of the third or fourth time or never.
Structure as a story. Okay, so what's number two?
So number two is, now that you have your story, how can you make it as succinct as possible? Right. And this is that adage. There's a little bit of debate about who actually, said it first, but I think there's the Mark Twain one where he actually got a telegram from his editor that said, hey, I need 2 pages in 2 days. And he wrote back and he said, no, can do. I can give you 30 pages in 2 days, or I can give you 2 pages in 30 days. You pick. And so you have to do the work of really making your presentation as succinct as possible. It needs to be really boiled down. You need to get rid of all of the clutter. And leaders crave quick, succinct, and to the point presentations. So succinct is really important. The third one is, and here's where we start to move into some design aspects of your presentation. Your presentation has to be scannable. It needs to be in a format and a layout and a form that when you look at the page, it's instantly apprehendable. And I advise a lot of the folks that I work with to look at, good web design. And this is really a usability issue. You need plenty of white space. You don't want bullets that go, from left to right and fill the whole page and nothing is really popping out. So it's a matter of using, really good usability principles to have a page that pops and makes it immediately available to the person reading it, what they're supposed to be getting from that page. And
let's explore this a little bit. So when you say scannable, my brain was first thinking the overall presentation, but what you're saying is your slide. When you've got a slide up there, it has to be immediately scannable so that they can pick it up right away, and you're not losing their attention to them trying to decipher what in the heck you've got going on behind you.
That's exactly right. And I'll give you a little story anecdote about this one. I was working with this one team at a major pharmaceutical company. And one of the things that I always do in the training is I'll try to take one of their very dense decks that they think is like, listen, this is everything that has to be in here for us to get to the decision. And I'll just clean it up. And I usually do this little game in the training where I take one of their decks and I flip through it. And they get about 10 seconds per page right? Like, okay, I'm just going to flip through this. You guys are looking at it on the screen, and I just, click, click, click every 10 seconds. Like, okay, what'd you get? And it's like, well, I got that they're trying to figure this out, but there's usually very little detail that they can provide. And then I'll go and I'll present the makeover, and I'll flip through the slides, giving them the same 10 seconds. And they'll be like, wow, okay, I got that, we're trying to accomplish this, but this is the problem, why we haven't been able to accomplish it before. And so we need to do these three things. And if we do these three things, we can expect this. And the reason that they were able to get it is because, the headlines, I call them headlines. So the title of your slide is usually always a sentence that says something, that has a verb and a subject, and it actually tells a mini story. And then you're using things like bolds on the key ideas, and images really work to help people get an idea. So as soon as they look at it, it's like, boom, I've got what I needed to get from that slide. I can move to the next one. And so at a page level, it needs to be scannable. And as a presentation overall, someone should be able to get through your presentation in like 10, 15 minutes, at least to the main ideas, and then dive deeper if they really want to get the detail.
And one thing that has really helped me with my decks and my design, well, number one, I've been very fortunate to work with a lot of great designers. I'm a writer by trade and a producer by trade. Never had a design course in my life, but I've been around a lot of really good creative directors and designers, and they have taught me so much about balance and whatever. But you know what? For all those non-designers out there, one of the most powerful things you can do is go online, or even you can get some books out there on really great outdoor advertising. I'm talking billboards. And look at what makes a billboard really, really work. It is what you're saying, Ginger. It's simplicity. It's an image with a thought, a headline on there. And the best billboards are typically an image, headline, and logo. You don't really need anything else. You enable your audience to create their own call to action if you've done that visual storytelling really well. Well, that's been very helpful for me when I look at my slides and I say, does this read like a billboard? If somebody can digest it and have an impact, driving 80 miles an hour down the road, they glance up, they see it, can they get the message? And that always means being very simple and having dynamic balance, and quite often imagery versus numbers and bullet points and that sort of thing. I often coach that, what is the first syllable of numbers? It's numb. They numb your audience up. Your audience wants a story to place those numbers into context. So that's just a little trick that has been very helpful for me, and I've shared with other people. Just go look at really great billboard advertising, and that's what your slides need to do.
That's, I agree with you. And I'm going to add something to that as well.
Perfect.
Before you design a presentation, or before you develop your presentation, I ask folks to kind of consider, what altitude, or really focal length is this being read at? If it's a stage style presentation, a keynote, something like that, lots of image, few to zero words. If it's something that you're giving at a front of a conference room, right, then you start to get a little bit more. You need usually a few more words. A lot of the folks that I work with, we're also dealing with some very complex information. Sometimes it's science, it's technical, whatever, and you need to know that when you're sending a pre-read as well, which is usually going to have, you can have quite a bit of information here, that there's another altitude when you're reading a presentation sort of intimately. It's a one-to-one presentation, so you might be looking at it on your tablet or laptop or desktop, and it doesn't have the benefit of any voiceover, right? And you're trying to make a business case, all right? So sometimes you're going to need numbers, or you're going to need the science, you're going to need these explanations. That's the case where, yes, you're going to need more text, but it can still be really pared down. And what you really want to put on the page are the result of the insights that were gotten from the analysis. And so I love your billboard analogy, and I use it a lot. It's not always practical when you've got some complex information that you're doing that's really going to be going with the pre-read. But pre-read for me is not permission to put every factoid that you ever gathered into your deck. It still has to be that front core piece of your deck needs to be story-based. It needs to be scannable. You can put in the appendix, tables up the wazoo and every other thing that you think that is absolutely going to be necessary. But that scannability still needs to be there, even if you're doing sort of a pre-read with a kind of greater density of information.
Right. Yeah, nope. That's a great point. Great point. Okay, so we've got structured as a story, make it as succinct as possible. It's got to be scannable. What's number 4?
Number 4 is sticky, right? So there need to be a couple of sort of, magic moments in there. And one of the best ways to provide stickiness, right? You want people to remember. People can only decide if they remember the key points. And there's so many ways to make a deck sticky. One way is to actually embed a story, right? That's whether it's a customer story or a member story or some sort of anecdote. Another way to make key concepts sticky are by providing really good visuals. Our minds are visual. One of the tricks that I tell folks a lot of times, like, even if you've got 3 points that you want to get across on a page, what PowerPoint wants you to do, and I kind of think, PowerPoint is an evil temptress, which is why I encourage people to wait till the last possible moment to go into it. What PowerPoint would have you do is jam in 3 bullets. Instead, even something as simple as taking your 3 ideas and putting them in 3 circles on the page, right? Because what that does is it gets your brain to remember, right, there's 3 ideas, because they saw things in a group of 3. Our brains just aren't really geared to process bullets, and a lot of text. We comprehend information, visually at a much faster rate than we can ever actually read and comprehend, letter forms on a page. And so part of your presentation being sticky is it being visual. And I don't actually, encourage any of the folks that I work with to get designers, because a lot of times they just don't have access to designers. But I encourage a ton of doodling in advance, because I'm like, if you can doodle the idea, you'll realize that you can, with very simple shapes that are already in your slideware, probably create a graphic that's going to get the idea across, and people are going to remember that graphic more than they're going to remember the words.
Awesome. Yeah, some great ideas there. I like that doodling. I guess I do doodle. I'm a horrible doodler, but I would never show it in public. But you're right. There is a way of clarifying in your own mind what you're trying to communicate visually when you're doing that. So what's number 5 then?
Also, one last note about the doodling. Doodling activates a completely different part of your brain. So a lot of folks, we do a lot of doodling in our workshops too. And when they doodle, they actually realize that they understand the concepts better. So I think the doodle is for you. No one has to understand it but you. But I definitely encourage people to doodle, because it will unlock a different way of understanding your information than you would if you were just kind of typing it out in words.
I got a new book for you then. Doodle your noodle. There you go. Just to get your thought down. There you go.
Sounds good. Okay, the last one.
Yeah.
The last one is, and it has to be shareable and spreadable. And this one will probably be new to your listeners. But what I mean here in shareable and spreadable is that the artifact of your deck, especially if you work in a very large corporation, it has to have all of the right metadata with that artifact so that someone can pick up your work and carry it on. And so a lot of times what you'll see, is that you've got, 6 different versions of a deck that were done at different points in time. But when you're looking at them, it's very hard to understand, God, what am I looking at here? At what point in time did this happen? So one of the things that I encourage everyone to do is to actually have an end page that has all of the key metadata. Who authored this deck? What was it authored for? When was it done? What version is it? What sources, what's your bibliography, basically? Where are your sources? What assumptions were associated with it? Different corporations need different metadata, but when you've got very large kind of big enterprise companies with thousands of people and you've got these artifacts floating around, a lot of folks, someone new will come in to pick up a project and they're trying to sift through all of these artifacts to figure out, which one of these is the source of truth? And at what point did they happen? So having your deck packaged, in my book, I talk about it, packaging it a lot like a book, right? Books have copyright dates and the publisher and the category that they fit into, in the Library of Congress and all that good stuff. And so you also need all of that key metadata to go with your deck so that it can live as an artifact and people can build on your work or ask questions down the line if they have them, because they'll know who authored it.
Yeah, help your story live on that way. And then they've got all the key information. Totally makes sense. I've never thought about that before. I need to start putting that even at the end of my decks, because I will do, primarily master classes or master courses, some keynotes, more virtual now than ever, but they always request that deck afterwards, and I give them an abridged version of it. But you know what? You just gave me a great idea, Ginger. From now on, I am going to have that final slide with all that information and additional resources on it that they can click through. Thank you for that.
Excellent. You're welcome. Excellent.
Hey, and thank you for taking the time to be here today. I really have enjoyed this conversation.
Park, it's been such a pleasure. I love your podcast. I really enjoyed your book. It was really great, and so it's just it's been my pleasure to be able to talk to you.
And where can people learn more about you and ultimately track down your book?
So since the book is not out yet, the best place to go right now is just to gingerzumaeta.com. That lets people sort of choose the adventure if they want to know a little bit more about Deconomics and the workshops we do, but also my kind of main gig where we still work with companies, my company Zumaeta Group, where we work with companies on positioning and messaging. So gingerzumaeta.com is the best place.
Yeah, ZUMAETA.com for those. We'll have it in the show notes as well, but just for all of you listening out there, check out our great work. And yeah, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure having you here.
Thanks a lot, Park. Take care.
And I'd like you all to think about those 5 words again. Let's hit them real quick, just as a refresh. So the next presentation you are doing out there, structure it as a story using Ginger's 12 P words. I think that's brilliant. And I think that's probably where most of the heavy lifting happens, because that's when you want to get yourself dialed in. Then, of course, you're going to have this big, long narrative. You want to make it as succinct and digestible as possible. Scannable. I love that. So that your slides aren't getting in the way of you presenting. People can scan it. They can get it immediately, but they can, more importantly, be listening to you and the important points that you are making, which then makes your deck, your information, your idea sticky. Now that they are seeing it, they can feel it, they can imagine and picture what your tomorrow could be if they just simply follow your instruction here. And then that last part about being shareable and making sure that it lives on as an artifact. So it's not one and done when you're in the room, that people can take that away and go, wow, this person's like really smart and here's the backup to it. So I love all of that. So thank you for listening to this edition. If you've got other colleagues that are needing to put together their presentations and you want to become their bestie on that, share this episode with them and be certain to track down Ginger's book when it comes out. And if I can be of service to you, come on over to the Business of Story, where I've got lots of tools, tips, techniques, and talent like Ginger there that will help you craft and tell compelling stories that sell regardless of what you're selling. And how do you like that? I still got my alert going off here. But share the show And if there's anything I can do for you, reach out to me at park@businessofstory.com. Come on back next Monday when we will have another story artist right here for you like Ginger. And until then, as she even alluded to earlier in the show, remember that the most potent story you'll ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make it a great one. Thanks so much for listening.